So we return to Goblin Market. So let's continue with our reading. Golden haired by golden haired, like two pigeons in one nest, folded in each other's wings, they lay down in their curtained bed, like two blossoms on one stem, like two flakes of new fallen snow, like two wands of ivory, tipped with gold for awful kings. Moon and stars gazed at them. Wind sang to them lullaby. Lumbering owls forbore to fly. Not a bat flapped to and fro round their rest. Cheek to cheek and breast to breast, locked together in one nest. Early in the morning, when the first cock crowed his warning, neat like bees, sweet and busy, Laura rose with Lizzie. Fetched in honey, milked the cows, aired and set to rights the house. Kneaded cakes of whitest wheat, cakes for dainty mouths to eat. Next churned butter, whipped up cream, fed their poultry, sat and sewed, talked as modest maidens should, Lizzie with an open heart, Laura in an absent dream, one content, one sick in part, one warbling for the mere bright day's delight, one longing for the night. At length slow evening came, they went with pitchers to the reedy brook, Lizzie most placid in her look, Laura most like a leaping flame. They drew the gurgling water from its deep. Lizzie plucked purple and rich golden flags, then turning homeward said, "The sunset flushes those furthest loftiest crags. Come, Laura, not another maiden lags. No wilful squirrel wags, the beasts and birds are fast asleep." But Laura loitered still among the rushes, and said the bank was steep. And said the hour was early still, the dew not fallen, the wind not chill, listening ever but not catching the customary cry, come by, with his iterated jingle of sugar-baited words. Not for all her watching, once discerning even one goblin, racing, whisking, tumbling, hobbling, let alone the herds that used to tramp along the glen, in groups or single, of brisk fruit merchant men. Till Lizzie urged, "Oh, Laura, come, I hear the flute call, but I dare not look. You should not loiter longer at this brook. Come with me home. The stars rise, the moon bends her arc, each glowworm wings her spark. Let us get home before the night grows dark, for clouds may gather, though this is summer weather. Put out the lights and drench us through. Then if we lost our way, what should we do?" Laura turned cold as stone, to find her sister heard that cry alone, that goblin's cry, "Come buy our fruits, come buy." Must she then buy no more such dainty fruit? Must she no more such succour's pasture find? Gone deaf and blind, her tree of life drooped from the root. She said not one word in her heart's sore ache, but peering through the dimness, not discerning, trudged home, her pitcher dripping all the way. So crept to bed and lay silent till Lizzie slept, then sat up in a passionate yearning, and gnashed her teeth for balls desire, and wept as if her heart would break. Day after day, night after night, Laura kept watch in vain, in sullen silence of exceeding pain. She never caught again the goblin cry, come buy, come buy. She never spied the goblin men, hawking their fruits along the glen. But when the noon waxed bright, her hair grew thin and grey, she dwindled as the fair full moon doth turn, to swift decay and burn her fire away. One day, remembering her kernel stone, she set it by a wall that faced the south, dewed it with tears, hoped for a root, watched for a waxing shoot, but there came none. It never saw the sun, it never felt the trickling moisture run, while with sunk eyes and faded mouth she dreamed of melons as a traveller sees false waves in desert drought, with shade of leaf-crowned trees, and burns the thirstier in the sandful breeze. She no more swept the house, tended the fowls or cows, fetched honey, kneaded cakes of wheat, brought water from the brook, but sat down listless in the chimney nook and would not eat. Tender Lizzie could not bear to watch her sister's cankerous care, yet not to share. She night and morning caught the goblin's cry, come buy our orchard fruits, come buy, come buy. Beside the brook, along the glen, she heard the tramp of goblin men, the yoke and stir. Poor Laura could not hear. longed to buy fruit to comfort her, but feared to pay too dear. She thought of Jeannie in her grave, who should have been a bride, but who for joys brides hope to have, fell sick and died in her gay prime, in earliest winter time, with the first glazing rime, with the first snowfall of crisp winter time, till Laura dwindling seemed knocking at death's door. Then Lizzie weighed no more, better and worse, but put a silver penny in her purse, kissed Laura, crossed the hearth with clumps of firs at twilight, halted by the brook, and for the first time in her life began to listen and look. Laughed every goblin when they spied her peeping, came toward her hobbling, flying, running, leaping, puffing and blowing, chuckling, clapping, crowing, clucking and gobbling, mopping and mowing, full of airs and graces, pulling wry faces, demo grimaces, cat-like and rat-like, rattle and wombat-like, snail pace in a hurry, parrot voice and whistler, helter-skelter, hurry-scurry, chattering like magpies, fluttering like pigeons, gliding like fishes, hugged and kissed her, squeezed and caressed her, stretched out their dishes, panniers and plates. Look at our apples, russet and dun, bob at our cherries, bright at our peaches, citrons and dates, grapes for the asking, pears red with basking. Out in the sun, plums on their twigs, pluck them and suck them, pomegranates, figs. Now, this segment again, so we see the story progress. We see that Lizzie is obviously happy, fine, she's unaffected. Laura, on the other hand, we realize is slowly wasting away. And if, for instance, we had to do a biblical reading of it, keeping in mind the opening idea of the fruit and the idea of temptation, so the Adam and Eve narrative, but completely changed over here because there is no Adam in this context. But if we were working with that as well, then sort of ties, because there's that line, early in the morning when the first cock crowed his warning. That's kind of like a biblical reference if we want to look that way. But if not, and we can totally ignore that, but it could be considered in the sense that she is using references that at least her audience would have understood, right? Now, we see that Lizzie's fine, all right, she's okay, she's able to do everything, all her tasks, provided it's the day. But the moment night comes, everything changes. She's uncomfortable because she can hear the goblin cry. But what's interesting is that one warbling for the mere bright day's delight, one longing for the night. Laura wants the night, in which case you can already see that she's sort of lost her innocence. She is no more a maiden, and the very fact that she can no more hear the goblin cry means she is no more a maiden. She has lost her innocence. She has given up something, and which is why they don't need her anymore. She's kind of like being used and thrown away. Right? And the fact that she can't hear the fruit call, it's very interesting, it's called the fruit call, means that her innocence or her bud has already been plucked, and so they don't really care about her, you know. So the idea that it's pleasure from the wrong places that is being criticized, right? Because and of course there is a certain moral framework over here as well, because we have the line, she thought of Jeannie in her grave, who should have been a bride, but who for joys brides hope to have, fell sick and died in her gay prime. That means she went and attempted something forbidden before her time. So it's kind of like a criticism of it, because they're sort of saying that, you know, you give in to desire and then you're sort of shamed by society. So there's a downward spiral and you lose your social position, and then there's ruin, and then there's death, right? Kind of like Hardy's Tess of d'Urbervilles, which also looks at this, you know, downward spiral of the character Tess. But here, for instance, the redemption, of course, comes from the sisterhood. But it's interesting that that is the narrative. And, you know, how do you protect the woman from falling into that pattern, right? But Victorian society had very clear ideas. A fallen woman who's transgressed Victorian sexual norms ought to die because that's better for her. But Rossetti's like, yeah, it's terrible, it's not good, because society will ruin it, and you will also die of the guilt, because you have in that sense been framed by society, you have been raised by society, so society's perspectives will influence you, so you will feel guilty at what you've done, and that will ruin you too. But you can be rescued, right? Which is an interesting thing. And we realize that Lizzie choosing to go to the goblins is in a way to try to rescue Laura from what has happened to her, right? Because and that is what makes this entire poem revolutionary, because the rescue of the fallen woman is never explored. It's always like she should die. One way or the other, death should reach her. There is no other ending that is possible for her. But here, Lizzie goes. Lizzie goes to save her. And Lizzie goes very interestingly with money, right? Because if we notice in the previous time, Laura had no money and they were fine with it, because, they asked her to pay with a lock of her hair, and that was great. Because they wanted her to give up something more precious. Money is fine. Lizzie, on the other hand, is going armed with money, because she is going to make it a transaction entirely, not like, say, maybe what happened with Laura. All right, and again, it maintains the language of the animal-like, imagery, the vermin-like imagery is sort of retained here. But also very interestingly, if you can notice a kind of, the imagery that Rossetti uses throughout the poem is one that is it hits all your senses, right? It's tactile, it's gustatory, it's olfactory, it's visual, and it's, yeah, it hits everything. I think I'm missing out something. Touch, sight, sense, smell, vision. Yeah, I think it ticks all the boxes. It's entirely sensory, right? So, good folk, said Lizzie, mindful of Janie, give me much and many, held out her apron, tossed them her penny. Nay, take a seat with us, honour and eat with us, they answered grinning. Our feast is but beginning. Night yet is early, warm and dew pearly. Wakeful and starry, such fruits as these no man can carry. Half their bloom would fly, half their dew would dry, half their flavour would pass by. Sit down and feast with us, be welcome guest with us, cheer you and rest with us. Thank you, said Lizzie, but one waits at home alone for me. So without further parleying, if you will not sell me any of your fruits, though much and many, give me back my silver penny I tossed you for a fee. They began to scratch their pates, no longer wagging, purring, but visibly demurring, grunting and snarling. One called her proud, cross-grained, uncivil. Their tones waxed loud, their looks were evil. Lashing their tails, they trod and hustled her, elbowed and jostled her, clawed with their nails, barking, mewing, hissing, mocking, tore her gown and soiled her stocking, twitched her hair out by the roots, stamped upon her tender feet, held her hands and squeezed their fruits against her mouth to make her eat. White and golden Lizzie stood, like a lily in a flood, like a rock of blue-veined stone, lashed by tides obstruously, like a beacon left alone, in a hoary roaring sea, sending up a golden fire, like a fruit-crowned orange tree, white with blossoms honey-sweet, sore beset by wasp and bee, like a royal virgin town, mad tug her standard down, topped with gilded dome and spire, 20 cannot make him drink. One may lead a horse to water, cross-beleaguered by a fleet, though the goblins cuffed and caught her, coaxed and fought her, bullied and besought her, scratched her, pinched her black as ink, kicked and knocked her, mauled and mocked her, Lizzie uttered not a word, would not open lip from lip, lest they should cram a mouthful in, but laughed in heart to feel the drip of juice that syruped all over her face and lodged in dimples of her chin, and streaked her neck which quaked like curd. At last the evil people, worn out by her resistance, flung back her penny, kicked their fruit along whichever road they took, not leaving root or stone or shoot. Some writhed into the ground, some dived into the brook with ring and ripple, some scudded on the gale without a sound, some vanished in the distance. In a smart ache, tinkle, Lizzie went her way, knew not was it night or day, sprang up the bank, tore through the furze, threaded copse and dingle, and heard her penny jingle bouncing in her purse. Its bounce was music to her ears. She ran and ran as if she feared some goblin man dogged her with jibe or curse, or something worse. But not one goblin scurried after, nor was she pricked by fear. The kind heart made her windy pace, that urged her home quite out of breath with haste and inward laughter. She cried, "Laura!" up the garden, "did you miss me? Come and kiss me, never mind my bruises. Hug me, kiss me, suck my juices, squeezed from goblin fruits for you, goblin pulp and goblin dew. Eat me, drink me, love me, Laura, make much of me. For your sake I have braved the glen, and had to do with goblin merchantmen." Laura started from her chair, flung her arms up in the air, clutched her hair. "Lizzie, Lizzie, have you tasted, for my sake, the fruit forbidden? Must your light like mine be hidden, your young life like mine be wasted, undone in mine undoing, and ruined in my ruin? Thirsty, cankered, goblin ridden." She clung about her sister, and kissed her and kissed her and kissed her. Tears once again refreshed her shrunken eyes, dropping like rain after long sultry drought. Shaking with aguish, fear, and pain, she kissed and kissed her with a hungry mouth. Her lips began to scorch. That juice was wormwood to her tongue. She loathed the feast. Writhing as one possessed, she leaped and sung, rent all her robe and wrung her hands in lamentable haste, and beat her breast. Her locks streamed like the torch, borne like a racer at full speed, or like the mane of horses in their flight, or like an eagle when she stems the light, straight towards the sun, or like a caged thing freed, or like a flying flag when armies run. Swift fire spread through her veins, knocked at her heart, met the fire smouldering there, and overbore its lesser flame. She gorged on bitterness without a name. Ah, fool, to choose such part of soul-consuming care! Sense failed in mortal strife, like the watchtower of a town which an earthquake shatters down, like a lightning-stricken mast, like a wind-uprooted tree, spun about like a foam-topped waterspout. Cast down headlong in the sea, she fell at last. Pleasure pass and anguish pass, is it death or is it life? Life out of death. That night long Lizzie watched by her, counted her pulses flagging still, felt for her breath, held water to her lips, and cooled her face with tears and fanning leaves. But when the first bird chirped about the eaves, and early reapers plodded to the place of golden sheaves, and dew-wet grass bowed in the morning wind so brisk to pass, and new buds with new day oped of cup-like lilies on the stream, Laura awoke as from a dream, laughed in the innocent old way, hugged Lily, but not twice or thrice. Her gleaming locks showed not one thread of grey. Her breath was sweet as May, and light danced in her eyes. Days, weeks, months, years afterwards, when both were wives, with children of their own, their mother hearts beset with fears, their lives bound up in tender lives, Laura would call the little ones and tell them of her early prime, those pleasant days long gone, of not returning time, would talk about the haunted glen, the wicked quaint fruit merchant men, their fruits like honey to the throat, but poison in the blood. Men sell not such in any town. Would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good, and win the fiery antidote. Then joining hands to little hands, would bid them cling together, for there is no friend like a sister in calm or stormy weather, to cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. So, what's interesting here is that we end on this note of positivity. We end on this note of the sisterhood, the idea that your sister will rescue you. So it kind of, in many ways, goes to the idea that the woman must stand by the woman. Woman must protect woman. They must, in that sense, be there for each other, because there will always be savage creatures out there waiting to destroy you, right? Because even the description of the goblins, right? I mean, she tosses the penny very businesslike at them, but the moment she gives them the money, they assault her. And in fact, the description is like that of a rape, right? Because elbow jostled her, clawed with her nails, barking, mewing, tore her gown, soiled her stocking. It is a very violent language. In that sense, it echoes a previous bit where they're shown staring and sizing her up, right? It's that kind of violence that we see, the violence that is there, but at that point, because she gives in, so they don't have to use it. But since she's not giving in, they have to use violence to sort of get back at her. But what is interesting is that Lizzie feels victorious, because she hasn't given in. And in that sense, the fact that she chooses to be a sacrifice, she's sort of presented like a Christ figure for us, right? Because even then, if you notice, there's that same language of, it's a biblical language that is being used, eat me, drink me. It's a language of, my flesh is to be consumed and my blood is, wine. That kind of a language, the idea that you will be saved by consuming me, because that consumption would change your perspective towards life. Because when she kisses Lizzie, she immediately realizes that it's like wormwood. Now, wormwood is a poison, but interestingly, it's also used in creating absinthe. It's an interesting type, because you see that that's a poison, but it's also an ingredient in an alcohol, and a dangerous one, because absinthe is 94% proof. You could actually die if you consumed absinthe. But so it is, in that sense, very interesting that that's the language. Like, you consume me and you will be freed. You will be, redeemed in that sense. And in fact, the language of, rent her robes, beat her breast, it's actually again the language that you find in the Bible, the language of repentance, the language of feeling sorrow at what you've done, right? And the idea that she's being freed from this drug-addled state. It's kind of like an exorcism, because something is being freed from her. And even the idea of, swift fire spread through her veins, knocked at her heart, met the fire smoldering there, and overbore its lesser fame. It's like cold turkey, post, like if you administer cold turkey to someone who's into drugs, they experience a great deal of, there's a lot of physical distress, there's a lot of mental distress. And so it sort of matches that kind of a description, because in many cases also, when women are sort of preyed upon, they are also, drugs are used to sort of keep them subdued. That also happens. In fact, brothels frequently use drugs to keep the woman in a state of, intoxication. And because she needs to get her fix, she will continue to stay in the brothel. She won't run away. And so she'll remain trapped in that space, wasting away one way or the other. But here, because Lizzie decides to brave it, and she sort of stands at the breach for her, because that is the lines that she uses in many ways, would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good and win the fiery antidote. So it's like she's standing at the breach to save her. Because Lizzie does it, everything changes. So the fact being that women will always be preyed upon, there will always be such situations, but if you have a sisterhood, you can be rescued from that. There is a possibility of a redemption, even though it doesn't seem obvious otherwise. Social mores are being sort of flouted, but you can sort of be rescued by your sisterhood. So that's a really, really interesting thing that comes through in Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market. And we are, of course, given such wonderful imagery, because in many ways it is the imagery that you would find in In the fairy tale, it is this very haphazard kind of a narrative, and yet at the same time so fascinatingly paced for us, because it tells us so much about, how this idyllic world really works. And again, there are men, they're not being spoken about, because we do know that Laura and Lizzie both marry and they have children. Who they marry, not important. That's not the identity that's focused on. What's focused on is that they do marry, they do have children, and they care about their children, and they teach their children to stick together, to depend on each other, to form a sisterhood, to form a collective that they can sort of depend on. And through that, beat the expectations of society that could possibly be very demanding on oneself. All right. But with that, we kind of wrap up with our reading of Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti.